Close your eyes, relax, and drift into history. Welcome to another quiet journey through the past. Tonight, our path leads us into the soft darkness before dawn, long before the sun rises over the Nile. The air is still cool. The stars remain above the desert. Most people are sleeping beneath simple roofs of mud brick and bundled reeds. Fires have burned low. Dogs lie quietly beside doorways. The river moves through the darkness without hurry. Far away from kings and great monuments, ordinary people are beginning another day. Our story is about something small. Something so ordinary that few ancient writers ever thought to describe it. The washing of temple floors. Not battles. Not treasure. Not royal ceremonies. Only water, stone, tired hands, and the quiet work that kept sacred places clean. Many centuries ago, before the heat of the day settled over Egypt, before merchants opened their stalls and farmers walked toward the fields, a small group of workers often woke while darkness still covered the land. Their labor began before most people had opened their eyes. The temple stood quietly ahead of them. Its walls rose from the earth like a stone cliff shaped by human hands. Tall columns waited in silence. Painted carvings rested in shadows. Large wooden doors remained closed. The building seemed asleep. But temples never truly slept. Even during the quietest hours, duties continued. Someone always had work to do. Someone always carried water. Someone always swept dust. Someone always prepared for the coming day. The workers who cleaned the floors were rarely remembered by name. Their lives left few traces. No statues were raised for them. No songs celebrated their efforts. Yet every morning their work helped create the calm and order expected inside sacred spaces. A temple floor might appear simple at first glance. Stone is stone. Yet these floors stretched across courtyards, halls, passages, chambers, and open gathering places. Some stones had been polished smooth by thousands of sandals. Others remained rough beneath bare feet. Dust settled constantly upon them. The desert was always near. Wind carried fine sand through open gates and along stone corridors. Even on peaceful days, dust arrived. It gathered slowly. A thin layer at first. Then another. Then another. Without attention, the floor would soon lose its clean appearance. Before sunrise, the first workers approached carrying jars. The jars were heavy. Many had traveled from nearby water sources. Others had been filled the evening before and stored in shaded areas. Water was precious. Everything depended upon it. Farmers depended on it. Animals depended on it. Families depended on it. And temples needed it as well. The workers walked carefully. The jars rested against shoulders and hips. Leather straps pressed against skin. The weight pulled downward with every step. The roads leading toward the temple were quiet. Only occasional sounds disturbed the darkness. A distant donkey. The whisper of wind. A bird beginning its first morning call. Some workers traveled together. Others walked alone. Many knew exactly how the day would unfold. They had performed these same tasks hundreds of times before. Routine shaped their lives. The temple entrance slowly emerged from the darkness. Torches flickered near doorways. A guard stood nearby. Perhaps he nodded toward familiar faces. Perhaps he remained silent. Soon the workers crossed into spaces that most ordinary people rarely entered. The stone beneath their feet felt cool. Night air lingered among the columns. The smell inside the temple was difficult to describe. It was a mixture of stone, oil lamps, incense, old wood, damp water jars, and countless years of human activity. Every building develops its own scent. Ancient temples were no different. The cleaning work began quietly. Voices remained low. There was no need for conversation. Each person understood the routine. Water jars were lowered to the ground. Cloths were prepared. Simple brushes were gathered. Some workers carried bundles of plant fibers used for scrubbing. Others brought tools made from reeds and palm materials. Nothing was wasted. Everything had a purpose. The first water touched the floor. A small splash echoed through the hall. Then another. Soon the sound of washing became the dominant sound in the temple. Soft splashing. Gentle scraping. The movement of cloth across stone. The slow shifting of feet. These sounds blended together like a steady rhythm. Outside, dawn was beginning. The eastern sky softened from black into deep blue. A faint silver glow appeared above the horizon. Inside the temple, workers continued their tasks. Water spread across stone surfaces. Dust loosened. Tiny grains of sand collected into muddy streaks. Cloths moved back and forth. Again and again. The work demanded patience more than strength. No section could be ignored. Every area required attention. Corners gathered dust. Passageways collected footprints. Open courtyards received wind-blown debris. The labor continued steadily. One worker might focus on a long hallway. Another might clean around the base of columns. A third might carry fresh water to replace what had already been used. The temple slowly awakened around them. Light entered through openings high above. Golden rays touched carved walls. Images of gods, animals, plants, and symbols slowly emerged from the shadows. The workers rarely paused to admire these sights. They saw them every day. Familiar beauty becomes part of ordinary life. Even the most magnificent surroundings can feel routine when work must be completed before sunrise. Beyond the temple walls, Egypt itself was waking. Farmers stepped outside their homes. Bread ovens began producing warmth. Fishermen prepared boats along the Nile. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes. Merchants arranged goods for another day of trade. Life expanded outward in every direction. Yet inside the temple, the washing continued. The floor seemed endless. A worker might spend hours cleaning the same general area. Stone retained traces of yesterday. Footprints. Dust. Tiny bits of plant matter. Drops of oil. Fragments carried in by countless visitors. The goal was not perfection. Perfection belonged to the gods. The goal was care. Attention. Order. The belief that sacred places deserved steady maintenance. As sunlight strengthened, the temperature began to rise. Egyptian mornings often started pleasantly. But heat arrived quickly. The workers understood this well. Sweat appeared along foreheads. Hands grew damp. Clothing clung more closely to skin. Still they continued. The jars gradually emptied. Fresh ones arrived. The cycle repeated. Carry water. Pour water. Wash stone. Remove dirt. Carry more water. Again and again. Many laborers throughout Egypt experienced similar rhythms. Farmers repeated planting routines. Builders repeated lifting routines. Bakers repeated kneading routines. Temple cleaners repeated washing routines. Much of ancient life was built upon repetition. A person learned movements until they became almost automatic. The body remembered. The hands remembered. The feet remembered. The workers cleaning temple floors probably thought about many things during these long hours. Perhaps they considered family members still sleeping at home. Perhaps they worried about food supplies. Perhaps they wondered whether the Nile's flood would be favorable that year. Perhaps they simply focused on the task directly before them. Human thoughts drift easily during repetitive work. The mind travels while the hands continue. A young worker might still be learning. Older laborers could show proper methods. How much water should be used? Which sections required extra attention? How to avoid wasting effort? Knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. No written instructions were necessary. Observation taught almost everything. Watch carefully. Practice slowly. Improve gradually. The temple itself remained patient. It had stood through many seasons. It would stand through many more. Stone does not hurry. Stone waits. Workers came and went across decades. The floors remained. Each morning brought another layer of care. Another small act of maintenance. Another effort to keep order against dust, weather, and time. As the morning advanced, sounds from outside grew louder. Voices drifted inward. Animals moved through nearby streets. Wheels creaked. Vendors called to customers. Egypt was fully awake. Yet portions of the temple still felt removed from the busy world beyond its walls. Cool shadows lingered in certain chambers. Quiet corners remained untouched by outside noise. Cleaning these spaces often felt different. The air seemed still. Every footstep echoed softly. A worker kneeling beside a stone floor might hear only water and breathing. Moments like these were common. Not dramatic. Not remarkable. Simply peaceful. Many ancient workers likely experienced small islands of calm during their day. Brief moments when activity slowed. Moments when no one demanded anything. Moments when only simple work remained. The floor gradually changed beneath their efforts. Dust disappeared. Stone regained its appearance. Light reflected more clearly from certain surfaces. The transformation was subtle. Nothing spectacular occurred. Yet the difference was real. A clean floor welcomed the day differently than a neglected one. The workers knew this. That knowledge was enough. The sun climbed higher. Warmth spread through the temple. Some workers stretched tired backs. Others adjusted sandals. Water jars continued arriving. The labor continued without complaint. By now many temple officials had begun their own routines. Scribes prepared writing materials. Priests organized daily duties. Messengers arrived with information. Visitors approached entrances. The building filled with life. Yet much of this activity depended upon work already completed before dawn. Many forms of labor remain invisible once finished. People notice dirty floors. Few notice clean ones. That has always been true. The greatest sign of successful cleaning is often its absence. Nothing attracts attention. Everything simply feels orderly. And so the workers continued through the morning light, moving carefully across ancient stone, carrying water beneath a brightening sky, while the Nile flowed steadily beyond the fields and villages of Egypt. Their names have mostly disappeared. Their voices are gone. Their stories survive only in fragments. Yet their footsteps once echoed through these halls. Their hands once guided wet cloth across cool stone. Their labor belonged to the countless ordinary efforts that quietly supported an entire civilization. The day was still young. Much work remained. The temple floor stretched onward beneath the growing light, waiting patiently for another sweep of water, another careful pass of tired hands, and another peaceful morning in the ancient world. The morning continued to unfold slowly across the land. Sunlight now rested fully upon the river. The Nile shimmered beneath the growing brightness of the day. Fishermen guided their boats through calm water. Farmers walked narrow paths between fields. Smoke drifted upward from cooking fires. Fresh bread cooled upon woven trays outside small homes built from mud brick. Inside the temple, the air was beginning to change. The coolness of dawn was fading. Stone walls that had held the night's comfort slowly surrendered it to the rising heat. The workers could feel the difference with every passing hour. Sweat gathered more quickly. Water jars felt heavier. The simple motions of washing and carrying required greater effort than they had before sunrise. Yet the rhythm remained steady. One man knelt beside a row of columns, pressing a damp cloth across stone worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Another carried water from a shaded storage area. A young worker followed behind, gathering dirty cloths and exchanging them for clean ones. Nobody rushed. There was little reason to rush. Ancient work often moved according to the pace of the human body rather than the demands of a clock. The workers understood how much could be done in an hour because they had lived these routines for years. Their muscles knew the work. Their hands knew the weight of water jars. Their shoulders knew the feeling of carrying loads beneath the Egyptian sun. Outside, the city surrounding the temple grew busier. Merchants arranged baskets filled with onions, dates, figs, and garlic. Potters displayed freshly fired vessels. Children ran through dusty streets before being called back by parents. Donkeys carried sacks of grain from one neighborhood to another. The sounds drifted toward the temple. Faint conversations. Animal calls. The squeak of wooden wheels. The distant strike of tools from workshops. Life moved in every direction. Yet within certain parts of the temple, a strange quiet still remained. Large stone buildings have a way of holding silence. Even when activity fills their halls, some corners seem untouched by noise. A worker entering a shaded chamber might suddenly find himself surrounded by calm. The thick walls softened outside sounds. The air felt cooler. Light arrived only in narrow beams. Dust floated slowly through those shafts of sunlight, turning lazily in the stillness. Such moments were brief but memorable. A laborer washing stone in one of these quiet places might hear only the movement of water and the faint scrape of cloth against the floor. Nothing else. Just the simple sound of work. The floor beneath him may have been centuries old. Thousands upon thousands of feet had crossed it. Priests had walked there. Scribes had walked there. Builders, servants, guards, and visitors had walked there. Generations had come and gone. Yet the stone remained. Smooth in some places. Cracked in others. Darkened where countless sandals had passed. Every mark told a story too small for history books. The workers did not think about this often. They had little time for such reflections. Most were concerned with practical matters. How much water remained? Whether more supplies would arrive? How many sections still needed attention? Whether their families had enough food waiting at home? Ancient people worried about ordinary things much as people always have. The grand stories of history often overlook this reality. Most lives were shaped not by famous events but by daily needs. Food. Work. Shelter. Rest. The workers who cleaned temple floors belonged to this quiet world. Many likely lived in modest homes not far away. Their houses were simple structures built from mud brick dried beneath the sun. Inside, rooms remained small and practical. Furniture was limited. Sleeping mats rested upon the floor. Storage jars lined walls. Life unfolded in close quarters. At night, families gathered together beneath roofs designed to keep out heat and dust. The day before had likely ended much as this one would. A simple meal. Conversation. Tired bodies seeking rest. Then sleep. Only to rise again before dawn. As the morning advanced, more visitors began arriving at the temple. Some came carrying offerings. Others came seeking guidance or fulfilling obligations. Their sandals brought fresh dust from roads and pathways. The workers cleaning the floors understood the cycle well. No matter how carefully they washed, new dust would eventually arrive. The desert always found its way back. Yet this did not make the work pointless. The goal was never permanent cleanliness. The goal was continual care. This idea shaped much of life in ancient Egypt. Fields required constant attention. Canals required maintenance. Boats required repairs. Homes required upkeep. Nothing remained orderly without effort. Each day demanded small acts of maintenance. Temple floors were no different. The workers accepted this reality. There was comfort in repetition. There was comfort in knowing exactly what tomorrow would bring. The same halls. The same stone. The same water jars. The same familiar faces. Predictability eased the mind. A young worker carrying fresh water may have recognized every crack in the floor. He knew which corridors stayed cool longest. He knew which sections gathered the most dust. He knew where sunlight first appeared each morning. Knowledge like this accumulated slowly. Not from books. Not from lessons. Simply from being present day after day. Year after year. The temple became familiar in the same way a farmer knows his field. Every corner carried memory. Every hallway felt known. As midday approached, the heat strengthened considerably. Sunlight reflected from stone surfaces outside. The air above roads began to shimmer. Workers throughout the city felt the weight of the day settling upon them. Farmers paused beneath limited shade. Boatmen wiped sweat from their brows. Market sellers drank carefully from water jars. The temple cleaners felt it too. Their clothing darkened with perspiration. Their movements slowed slightly. Not from laziness. Simply from exhaustion. The human body can only move so quickly beneath relentless heat. Some areas of the temple offered relief. Wide columns cast long shadows. Covered halls remained cooler than open courtyards. Workers often welcomed assignments in shaded sections. Even a small difference in temperature mattered. A cool breeze occasionally slipped through stone doorways. When it arrived, workers noticed immediately. Such breezes felt precious. For a few moments, the air moved across damp skin and eased the burden of the heat. Then it passed. The day continued. One worker carefully poured water across a section of floor decorated with faint carved patterns. Another used a bundle of reeds to remove dirt from cracks between stones. Nearby, an older laborer inspected completed work before moving forward. The tasks were not complicated. Yet they required patience. A rushed job created more work later. Carelessness allowed dirt to remain. The best workers learned consistency. Steady effort. Measured movement. Attention to detail. These qualities mattered more than speed. Hours slipped by. The sun climbed higher. The city outside buzzed with activity. Inside the temple, the workers continued following familiar routines. At times they spoke quietly among themselves. Short conversations. Simple observations. Questions about family. Comments about weather. News from nearby neighborhoods. Nothing dramatic. Most ancient conversations likely sounded much like ordinary conversations today. People discussing daily life. People sharing concerns. People passing time while work continued. Occasionally laughter appeared. Brief and gentle. Then silence returned. The labor carried on. The smell inside the temple changed throughout the day. Morning moisture gradually mixed with warm stone and human activity. Incense drifted from certain chambers. Oil lamps contributed faint sense of smoke. Fresh water added a cool earthy smell. Together these aromas created an atmosphere unique to the building. Anyone entering from the bright streets outside would have noticed it immediately. The temple possessed its own character, its own mood, its own rhythm. The workers became so accustomed to it that they barely noticed. Familiar things often disappear into the background. Only visitors recognize them clearly. As afternoon approached, some cleaning tasks neared completion. Large sections of floor now appeared clean and orderly. Stone surfaces reflected light more evenly. Dust had been removed. Footprints erased. Mud washed away. The results remained quiet and subtle. Yet the workers could see the difference. The temple looked cared for. Ready for another day. That readiness mattered. Ancient temples were not simply buildings. They were living centers of activity. People arrived constantly. Supplies entered and exited. Messages were delivered. Ceremonies occurred. Records were written. Food was stored. Repairs were made. Workers moved through every space. A clean environment supported all of it. And so the labor continued beneath the steady Egyptian sun. Beyond the walls, fields stretched toward the horizon. Palm trees sway gently near irrigation channels. The Nile flowed onward through the heart of the land. Boats drifted upon its surface. Birds crossed the sky. Life continued as it always had. Inside the temple, another water jar was lifted. Another cloth was wrung out. Another section of stone received careful attention. The workers moved quietly through the halls, following routines older than many could remember. The afternoon shadows had only begun to lengthen. Much of the day still remained. The afternoon settled gently across the land. The sun still stood high, though its climb had ended. Heat rested heavily upon the fields and roads. Dust lingered in the air above well-traveled paths. The bright light of Egypt covered everything, from the smallest fishing boat on the river to the tallest stone column of the temple. Inside the temple, the workers continued their quiet duties. The morning's energy had faded. Now came the slower hours. These were the hours when tired muscles began to speak more clearly. Shoulders ached. Knees felt stiff after long periods spent kneeling upon stone. Hands became rough from water, cloth, and endless repetition. Yet there was something peaceful about this part of the day. The busiest moments had passed. The frantic movement that sometimes accompanied the early morning had softened. A calmer rhythm took its place. The workers moved through the temple almost like shadows. One man carried a jar. Another washed a narrow passage. A third gathered used cloths and prepared fresh ones. No one needed instructions. The routine guided them. The temple itself seemed to breathe around them. Warm air drifted through open spaces. Sunlight crossed the floor in long bands. The position of those bright shapes slowly changed as the afternoon continued. A worker who had spent years inside these walls could almost tell the time by watching where the sunlight touched the stone. Every hour had its own pattern. Every season brought slight changes. The temple revealed these changes quietly. Nothing happened quickly. That was true for most things in ancient Egypt. The Nile rose slowly. Children grew slowly. Buildings took years to complete. Fields changed gradually with the seasons. Life unfolded at a patient pace. The workers cleaning the temple floor lived within that pace. Many had likely started such labor when they were young. Perhaps they first arrived carrying small containers instead of large jars. Perhaps they spent years assisting older workers before learning every task themselves. Knowledge often moved this way. Not through written lessons. Not through formal instruction. Simply through watching. Helping. Repeating. Remembering. A young worker might spend months learning how much water should be used on different kinds of stone. Too little water left dirt behind. Too much created unnecessary work. The balance came through experience. An older laborer could often tell immediately whether a floor had been washed properly. He might notice details invisible to others. A faint streak. A missed corner. A section that needed another pass. Such awareness developed slowly. Years of observation trained the eye. Outside the temple, many people sought shade during the hottest part of the day. Farmers rested beneath trees when possible. Boatmen sat beneath simple coverings stretched across their vessels. Market activity slowed. Even animals seemed less eager to move beneath the strong sun. The heat encouraged stillness. Inside the temple, workers welcomed shaded halls and covered chambers. These spaces felt precious during summer months. The thick stone walls blocked much of the sun's power. Temperatures remained more comfortable. A cool corridor could feel almost luxurious after hours spent near open courtyards. Some sections of the floor dried quickly. Others remained damp longer. Workers understood these differences. They adjusted their efforts accordingly. Every building develops its own habits. The temple had many. There were areas where dust always gathered. Corners where wind carried sand. Passages that remained cool. Courtyards that became unbearably hot. The workers knew them all. A person who spends years in one place learns its personality. The temple possessed one. Not through words. Not through thoughts. But through patterns. Through sunlight and shadow. Through temperature and sound. Through the way air moved from one room to another. As the afternoon continued, occasional visitors crossed the floors that had been cleaned earlier in the day. Their footsteps echoed softly. Sandals tapped against stone. Voices drifted through the halls. The workers watched without frustration. New footprints were inevitable. Dust would return. Tomorrow would bring another cleaning. The cycle never ended. Yet there was comfort in that certainty. The work would always be waiting. In many ways, ancient life depended upon accepting such cycles. A farmer knew weeds would return. A baker knew bread would need baking again tomorrow. A fisherman knew another morning would require another trip onto the river. Temple cleaners understood that clean floors eventually became dirty floors. This did not lessen the value of the work. Instead, it gave the work meaning. Each effort belonged to a larger pattern. A continuous chain of care stretching across months and years. The afternoon light grew softer. Not dramatically. Only slightly. The harsh brilliance of midday began its gradual decline. Shadows lengthened beneath columns. The bright edges of stone became gentler. The workers noticed these changes even if they rarely thought about them. Their bodies understood the passing hours. The day had entered a quieter stage. One elderly worker paused briefly near a column. Perhaps he stretched his back. Perhaps he simply rested for a moment before continuing. Years of labor leave their mark upon the body. Muscles weaken. Joints become less forgiving. Movements that once felt effortless require greater care. Ancient workers experienced this reality as clearly as anyone today. Many carried signs of hard labor. Calloused hands. Weathered skin. Old injuries. Stiff movements. The work of washing temple floors may not have seemed as demanding as quarrying stone or building walls, yet it still required endurance. Water was heavy. Stone was unforgiving. Hours were long. The body remembered every day. Yet there was dignity in such labor. The workers may not have possessed wealth or status, but their efforts mattered. Without countless ordinary laborers, ancient Egypt could not have functioned. Every clean floor, every repaired wall, every harvested field, every loaf of bread, all depended upon people performing necessary tasks. History often remembers rulers. Daily life depended upon workers. As sunlight shifted across the temple, the carvings on walls seemed to change. Images that had appeared flat during midday gained depth as shadows entered the carved lines. Birds, plants, animals, and figures emerged more clearly. The workers passed these images every day. Many probably stopped noticing them. Yet visitors might have found them remarkable. Human attention works this way. What is familiar fades into the background. What is new appears extraordinary. A laborer focused on his work rarely spent much time studying the walls. His concerns were practical. How much remained to be done? Whether enough water was available. How tired he felt. Whether he would reach home before darkness. These simple concerns filled much of life. As the afternoon moved onward, sounds within the temple changed. Morning crowds had thinned. Some visitors departed. Certain activities slowed. Footsteps became less frequent. Voices grew quieter. The building settled into a calmer state. This quieter atmosphere suited the workers. The steady sounds of cleaning became more noticeable. The splash of water. The rubbing of cloth. The movement of sandals against stone. These sounds accompanied them through every day. They formed a kind of music. Not a song. Not a melody. Simply the familiar sounds of labor. The sounds of people caring for a place. Far beyond the temple walls, the Nile continued its patient journey. Its waters moved through the landscape much as they had for countless generations. Villages lined its banks. Children played near its edges. Boats crossed from shore to shore. Farmers depended upon it. The river connected nearly every aspect of life. Even the water used within the temple often began its journey there. Carried in jars. Stored carefully. Poured across stone floors by workers whose names have long vanished. The connection between river and temple remained constant. Water flowed from the Nile into daily life. Into homes. Into workshops. Into sacred spaces. Into the hands of laborers. The afternoon gradually drifted toward evening. Not yet. Not fully. But the first hints had arrived. The sun lowered slightly. The air softened. The promise of cooler hours waited somewhere ahead. The workers sensed it. A long day was beginning its slow turn toward rest. Still, work remained. Another corridor. Another chamber. Another stretch of stone floor. The temple continued to receive their attention. Patiently. Quietly. steadily. And so they moved onward through the fading afternoon light, carrying water across ancient floors, leaving behind clean stone and careful work while the great river flowed beyond the fields, and the long Egyptian day slowly drifted toward evening. The afternoon slowly softened into the first gentle signs of evening. The sun no longer felt quite as fierce as it had a few hours before. Its light remained bright, but the harsh edge of midday was fading. Across the land, shadows stretched farther over dusty roads and narrow pathways. Palm trees cast longer shapes upon the earth. The Nile reflected bands of gold where sunlight touched the water. Inside the temple, the workers noticed the change without needing to look at the sky. Their bodies understood. The air felt different. The stone beneath their feet felt different. Even the sounds inside the temple seemed to change as the day moved toward its quieter hours. Many tasks had already been completed. Large sections of the floor now appeared clean and orderly. Water had dried from most surfaces. Dust had been removed from corners and passageways. The halls carried a sense of care that could only come from many hours of patient labor. Still, there was always more to do. There was always another area waiting for attention. One worker crossed a broad courtyard carrying a half-filled jar. His sandals scraped lightly against stone warmed by the day's heat. The surface beneath his feet still held sunlight gathered throughout the afternoon. Stone remembers warmth. Even as the air cools, stone releases its stored heat slowly. The workers knew this well. They felt it every evening. The temple itself seemed to settle into a calmer mood. Earlier, the halls had been filled with movement. Visitors had come and gone. Messengers had crossed the corridors. Priests and scribes had followed their daily routines. Now much of that activity was beginning to lessen. The busiest hours were ending. A quieter period approached. In some chambers, only a few people remained. Footsteps echoed more clearly. Voices carried farther. Silence occupied the spaces between sounds. The workers moved through these calmer halls with practiced ease. Many had spent years inside this building. They knew every doorway, every corridor, every shaded corner. The temple felt almost like a second home. Not a place of rest. Not a place of family. But a place deeply familiar. A place whose rhythms had become part of their lives. As one laborer knelt beside a section of floor near a row of columns, a gentle breeze slipped through an open entrance. It was not a strong wind. Only a faint movement of air. Yet after a long day, even a small breeze felt welcome. The coolness touched damp skin. For a moment, the worker paused. Not because he wished to stop working. Simply because the feeling was pleasant. Then he returned to his task. Nearby, another laborer wrung water from a cloth. Drops splashed quietly onto the stone. The sound echoed softly through the chamber. Small sounds often seem larger in quiet places. A falling drop. A shifting footstep. The rustle of fabric. The temple magnified these gentle noises. As daylight continued its slow journey toward evening, the colors within the temple began to change. The bright white glare of afternoon softened into warmer shades. Golden light entered through openings high in the walls. Dust floating through the air glowed softly. Stone carvings seemed almost alive beneath the shifting shadows. Scenes carved centuries earlier emerged and faded as sunlight moved across them. Birds appeared. Plants appeared. Human figures appeared. Then shadows covered them once more. The workers rarely paused to observe such details. Yet sometimes, during long hours of repetitive labor, the eye naturally wandered. A carving noticed 1,000 times before might suddenly seem new. A familiar column might catch the light differently. Even routine contains moments of quiet beauty. Outside the temple walls, life was changing as well. Farmers began preparing for the end of their workday. Some gathered tools. Others checked irrigation channels one final time before returning home. Along the Nile, fishermen guided boats toward shore. The day's catch would soon be sorted and carried to markets or households. Children played in open spaces between homes. Their laughter drifted through the warm evening air. Mothers prepared meals. Fires were lit. The smell of baking bread slowly spread through neighborhoods. Ancient Egypt was entering one of its most peaceful hours. The heat was easing. The hardest work was nearly finished. The promise of food and rest waited ahead. Inside the temple, the workers cleaning the floors likely thought about these things. Perhaps one man imagined the meal waiting for him at home. A simple meal. Bread. Vegetables. Maybe fish. Maybe dates. Nothing extravagant. Just food earned through honest labor. Perhaps another worker thought about his children. Perhaps he wondered whether they had spent the day helping with chores or playing beside the river. Perhaps he imagined their faces as evening approached. Long days often encourage such thoughts. The mind travels toward home as the body completes its final tasks. Yet the work still demanded attention. Temple floors required care until the very end of the day. A neglected corner remained neglected regardless of how tired a worker felt. So the labor continued. Steady. Patient. Unhurried. A group of workers crossed a large hall carrying fresh water. The jars were not as full as those brought during the morning. Less water was needed now. Most major cleaning had already been completed. Still, certain areas required one final washing. The workers moved together through shafts of golden sunlight. Their shadows stretched across the stone floor. For a moment, they became part of the temple's changing patterns of light and shadow. Then they passed onward. The day continued. As evening drew closer, some birds began gathering near the temple grounds. Their calls echoed from walls and rooftops. A few settled upon ledges high above the courtyards. Others circled briefly before disappearing toward the river. These sounds had accompanied countless evenings. The workers hardly noticed them anymore. Yet they formed part of the familiar rhythm of life. Every place develops its own soundtrack. For the temple, it included water. Sandals on stone. Quiet voices. Bird calls. Wind moving through open spaces. And beyond everything, the distant sounds of a living city. An older worker slowly crossed one of the outer courtyards. Years of labor showed in his movements. He was not weak. He was simply tired in the way that comes from decades of physical work. Every step carried experience. Every movement reflected habits formed over many years. He had likely seen countless mornings inside these walls. Countless evenings as well. Young workers had arrived and grown older beside him. Seasons had passed. Floods had come and gone. Yet the temple remained. And the floors still required washing. The continuity of such work is difficult to imagine. Year after year. Generation after generation. The same tasks continued. Not because people lacked imagination. Not because life never changed. But because certain responsibilities always remained necessary. Clean water was needed. Food was needed. Shelter was needed. And sacred places required care. As shadows lengthened further, parts of the temple began to cool. Workers noticed immediately. The stone no longer radiated the same intense warmth. The air felt easier to breathe. Fatigue remained, but the evening brought relief. Even the simplest breeze seemed stronger now. The approaching night was making itself known. Slowly. Gently. Without hurry. A final washing took place along a narrow corridor. Water flowed across the floor. Cloths moved steadily over the stone. The remaining traces of dust disappeared. The corridor joined the rest of the temple in quiet cleanliness. One more task completed. One more section cared for. The workers rarely celebrated such accomplishments. There was no need. The satisfaction came from seeing the work finished properly. From knowing the temple stood ready for another day. Outside, the sky was beginning to soften toward deeper colors. The first hints of orange and amber appeared near the horizon. Palm leaves moved gently against the fading light. The Nile reflected the changing sky. Villages prepared for evening meals. Families gathered. Animals settled. The long day was drawing closer to its end. Yet within the temple, a few workers still moved quietly through the halls. Their footsteps echoed beneath high ceilings. Water jars rested near walls. Cloths hung drying in shaded areas. The scent of damp stone lingered softly in the air. The building felt calm. Almost sleepy. And as the golden light of evening continued to spread across ancient Egypt, the workers carried on with their final duties, moving patiently through the temple's quiet halls while the world beyond slowly prepared for night. Evening settled gradually over the land. The sun lowered toward the western horizon, and the bright colors of the day softened into warmer shades. Golden light rested upon the Nile. Palm trees stood quietly against the glowing sky. Long shadows stretched across fields, roads, and temple walls. The heat that had ruled the afternoon was finally beginning to loosen its grip. For the workers inside the temple, this change felt like a gift. The air remained warm, but it was no longer heavy in the same way. Breathing became easier. Muscles that had endured a full day of labor felt a small measure of relief. The temple itself seemed to welcome the cooling hours. Stone corridors that had held the day's warmth slowly released it. Courtyards became more comfortable. Chambers hidden from direct sunlight grew pleasantly cool. The workers continued moving through these spaces, completing the final tasks that remained before night. The sound of washing had become less frequent now. Most floors had already received their careful attention. Only certain areas still required work. A cloth moved across stone. A small splash of water echoed through a hallway. A jar was lifted and carried to another chamber. These sounds appeared separately now rather than together. The busy rhythm of morning had faded into something gentler. Something quieter. In one section of the temple, a worker carefully inspected a broad stone floor that had been cleaned earlier in the day. The surface looked smooth beneath the evening light. Tiny grains of dust still appeared here and there, but that was expected. The desert never truly disappeared. No amount of cleaning could stop the wind from carrying sand. Yet the floor looked cared for. Orderly. Prepared. The worker nodded slightly before continuing onward. There was satisfaction in seeing a task completed well. Not pride in a grand sense. Simply the quiet comfort of knowing that effort had produced results. Many ancient laborers likely found meaning in such moments. Life was often difficult. Food required work. Shelter required work. Everything required work. When a task was completed properly, even a small one, it carried its own reward. Beyond the temple walls, the city was changing. The busiest hours of trade were ending. Market sellers packed away goods that had not been purchased. Baskets were lifted. Tables were cleared. Conversations turned toward home. The smell of evening meals drifted through narrow streets. Fresh bread. Cooked vegetables. Fish from the river. Simple foods prepared after long days of labor. Families began gathering together. Children returned from their wandering. Doors opened and closed. Voices filled homes built from mud brick. The workers inside the temple knew these scenes well. Many would soon be part of them. Yet for now, they remained inside the ancient stone walls. The temple was quieter than it had been at any point during the day. Fewer visitors remained. Fewer footsteps crossed the halls. The great chambers felt larger in the silence. Every sound traveled farther. The scrape of a sandal. The shifting of cloth. The distant call of a bird outside. These small noises floated through the air and slowly faded away. As evening deepened, oil lamps began appearing in certain areas. Their flames flickered gently. Soft light danced across stone surfaces. The warm glow created moving shadows among columns and carved walls. The atmosphere changed completely. A temple illuminated by lamps felt different from a temple illuminated by sunlight. More intimate. More peaceful. The workers were accustomed to both. They had watched the building transform countless times. Morning sunlight. Midday brightness. Afternoon gold. Evening flame. Each stage carried its own mood. The temple never truly looked the same from one hour to the next. One laborer paused near a doorway and looked outward toward the fading sky. The horizon glowed softly. Birds crossed overhead on their way to resting places. The air carried the faint scent of water from the river. Perhaps he thought of home. Perhaps he thought of supper waiting. Or perhaps he simply enjoyed a moment of stillness before returning to work. Not every pause requires a reason. Sometimes a person simply stands quietly for a moment. Ancient people understood this as well as anyone. The day had been long. There was comfort in stillness. Nearby, another worker gathered cloths that had been used throughout the day. Some were damp. Others had already dried in the evening air. Each would need cleaning before being used again. Nothing was wasted. Materials required effort to produce. Every cloth represented labor. Every jar represented labor. Every tool represented labor. Care for possessions was simply part of life. Throughout ancient Egypt, people repaired, reused, and maintained what they owned. Replacement was rarely easy. As darkness approached, the temple's carved walls became more mysterious. Details that had been clearly visible during daylight now softened in the flickering lamplight. Figures emerged briefly from shadows before disappearing again. Animals seemed to move as flames danced nearby. Plants carved into stone appeared almost alive. The workers rarely paid much attention. They had seen these images throughout their lives. Yet visitors might have found them remarkable. Especially during the quiet hours of evening. The changing light gave the ancient artwork a different presence. Outside, the Nile reflected the final colors of sunset. Its surface shifted from gold to copper, then gradually toward darker shades. Fishermen secured boats along the banks. Water lapped gently against wood. Voices drifted across the river. Then faded. The evening belonged to quieter sounds. Many workers throughout Egypt were now finishing their own tasks. Farmers stored tools. Builders ended their labor. Merchants closed stalls. The entire land seemed to exhale together. A day of work was ending. A night of rest approached. Inside the temple, the final cleaning tasks continued. A worker carried one last jar through a narrow corridor. Another swept away debris collected near an entrance. A third inspected sections completed earlier. No one hurried. There was no need. Night would arrive regardless of their pace. The important thing was to finish properly. To leave the temple in good order. The discipline of doing a task carefully remained important even when exhaustion appeared. Perhaps especially then. Anyone can work well when full of energy. True skill often appears when a person remains patient despite fatigue. The experienced workers understood this. Years of labor had taught them. The evening breeze strengthened slightly. Air moved through open courtyards and along stone passages. The change was subtle but welcome. The workers could feel it upon their skin. The temple seemed to breathe more easily. In distant neighborhoods, families were now eating supper. Small lamps glowed inside homes. Conversations unfolded quietly after the day's work. Some people sat outdoors while the evening remained pleasant. Others rested inside. Children listened to stories. Older relatives shared memories. The ordinary life of Egypt continued beyond the temple walls. It was this ordinary life that sustained the civilization. Not only rulers. Not only officials. But families. Workers. Farmers. Craftsmen. Boatmen. People whose names history rarely recorded. The temple cleaners belonged among them. Their labor formed part of a much larger picture. A web of daily effort stretching across the entire land. As darkness deepened, stars began appearing overhead. First one. Then another. Then many more. The sky above Egypt slowly filled with points of light. Workers crossing open courtyards could see them between rooftops and columns. The stars had watched countless generations perform these same routines. They watched now in silence. The temple floors were nearly finished. Most of the day's work had been completed. Clean stone stretched through hallways and chambers. Water jars stood emptied or nearly so. Cloths had been gathered. Tools organized. The building felt settled. Calm. Ready for the night ahead. Yet a few workers still moved quietly through the fading light, completing small tasks that remained unfinished. Their footsteps echoed softly through the temple while beyond the walls the Nile flowed beneath the first stars of evening, carrying cool reflections through the darkness as another ancient day slowly gave way to night. Night continued its slow arrival across the Nile Valley. The last traces of sunset had faded from the horizon. The warm colors of evening were gone now, replaced by deep blue shadows and the gentle darkness that settled over fields, villages, and waterways. Above, countless stars filled the sky. Far from the bright lights of the modern world, the night sky of ancient Egypt appeared vast beyond imagining. The stars seemed endless. They stretched from one horizon to the other, shining above the river, above the desert, above every sleeping village and every silent temple. Inside the temple, only a few lamps remained burning. Their small flames flickered quietly. Soft pools of golden light rested upon stone floors that had been washed and cared for throughout the long day. Beyond the reach of the lamps, shadows filled the halls. The workers who remained moved carefully through the dimness. Their tasks were nearly complete. The busiest hours had passed long ago. Now only the final duties remained. A cloth folded and stored. A jar returned to its place. A small section inspected one last time. These were quiet tasks suited to quiet hours. The temple felt different at night. The building that had been full of movement during the day now seemed larger. The silence made every corridor feel longer. Every chamber felt deeper. Every footstep echoed farther. One worker crossed a broad hall carrying an empty water jar. His sandals tapped softly against the stone. The sound traveled through the darkness and slowly disappeared. Then silence returned. The floor beneath him was cool now. Hours earlier it had held the warmth of the afternoon sun. Now the stone had surrendered much of that heat to the night air. The change felt pleasant after a day of labor. Throughout Egypt, people were settling into their evening routines. Families gathered within mud-brick homes. Simple meals had been shared. Children were becoming sleepy. Voices grew quieter. Oil lamps glowed gently inside small rooms. Outside, dogs rested near doorways. Donkeys stood quietly in enclosed spaces. The busiest sounds of the day had faded away. Only the peaceful sounds of evening remained. A distant conversation. A quiet laugh. The chirping of insects. The rustle of wind. Life slowed. The workers inside the temple looked forward to joining that peaceful world soon. Their bodies certainly did. After many hours of carrying water and washing stone, fatigue settled deeply into muscles and joints. Arms felt heavy. Legs felt tired. Backs ached. This kind of tiredness was familiar. It arrived at the end of nearly every working day. There was discomfort in it, certainly. Yet there was also satisfaction. The work had been completed. The effort had meaning. A laborer returning home after a full day often carried both exhaustion and contentment together. One did not cancel the other. The temple itself seemed ready for rest. The floors were clean. The halls orderly. The tools stored away. Only a handful of workers remained visible beneath the lamplight. The great building had settled into stillness. A breeze drifted through one of the outer courtyards. Palm leaves beyond the walls whispered softly. The sound barely reached the temple interior. Yet it was enough to remind anyone listening that the world outside continued quietly beneath the stars. In one chamber, an older worker sat briefly upon a low stone step. Not for long. Only a moment. His day had begun before sunrise. He had carried water, washed floors, crossed countless corridors. Now, for a few breaths, he simply rested. The stone beneath him felt cool. The air felt calm. The silence felt welcome. Perhaps he listened to the faint sounds of the night. Perhaps he thought about home. Perhaps he thought about nothing at all. Sometimes tiredness leaves little room for thoughts. The body simply enjoys being still. Nearby, another worker checked a row of lamps. The flames needed attention. Oil levels needed watching. A temple did not become completely dark all at once. Certain lights remained burning through portions of the night. Their glow helped guide those who still had duties to perform. The worker adjusted a wick. The flame brightened slightly. Light touched a nearby section of wall. Ancient carvings emerged from the darkness. A bird. A plant. A human figure carved long ago. Then the worker moved onward, and the images slipped back into shadow. The temple carried many such scenes. Thousands of carvings. Thousands of details. Most workers passed them without much notice. Yet the carvings remained. Patient. Silent. Watching generations come and go. Outside the temple grounds, the Nile flowed steadily through the darkness. The river never rested. Day and night, season after season, its waters moved onward. Many workers could hear it when the night grew especially quiet. Not clearly. Not loudly. only a distant suggestion of moving water. A soft presence beyond the city. The Nile was woven into every aspect of life. Its waters nourished crops, filled storage jars, supported fishermen, carried travelers. Even the water used to wash temple floors ultimately came from its life-giving flow. The connection was always there. The workers may not have thought about it often, yet it shaped everything around them. The stars climbed higher overhead. The night deepened. The air cooled further. For many people across Egypt, sleep had already arrived. Families rested upon mats and simple beds. The day's labor was finished. Dreams slowly replaced conversation. Villages grew quiet. Only occasional sounds disturbed the darkness. A barking dog. A crying infant. A shifting animal. Then silence again. The temple workers would soon join this nightly rhythm. Their own homes waited. Some lived nearby. Others faced a longer walk through dark streets before reaching their families. The journey home would feel different from the journey that morning. At dawn they had walked toward work. Now they would walk toward rest. There is a special feeling at the end of a long day. The body knows relief is near. Every step carries the promise of sleep. A worker crossing the temple one final time may have felt this deeply. The familiar halls behind him. The familiar night ahead. One more task. Then another. Then home. In a storage area near the edge of the temple, empty jars rested neatly together. Hours earlier they had been full of water. Now they stood silent and dry. The day's labor could almost be measured by them. Each empty vessel represented effort already completed. Each jar told part of the story of the day. Water carried. Water poured. Water used to care for stone floors that stretched throughout the temple. Nothing dramatic. Nothing celebrated. Simply necessary work completed faithfully. Much of human history has been built upon such work. Quiet labor. Repeated labor. Labor performed by people whose names have disappeared. Yet civilizations depended upon them. A temple could not remain orderly without cleaners. Fields could not produce food without farmers. Boats could not travel without boatmen. Homes could not function without daily care. The ordinary tasks of ordinary people quietly supported everything else. The night moved onward. One by one, the remaining workers finished their duties. A cloth stored away. A doorway checked. A final inspection completed. The temple settled into deeper silence. Only a few lamps continued burning. Their small flames reflected softly upon clean stone floors. The results of the day's work remained visible even in the dim light. The halls looked calm, orderly, peaceful, ready to welcome another dawn when it eventually arrived. But dawn was still far away. For now, the night belonged to stillness. The stars watched from above. The river flowed through the darkness. Cool air drifted across the land. And within the quiet temple, where floors had been washed by hand since the earliest hours of morning, the final sounds of labor slowly faded into silence while ancient Egypt rested beneath a sky filled with stars. The night settled more deeply across the land. Hours had passed since sunset. The villages along the Nile had grown quiet. Most doorways were closed. Most lamps burned low. Families rested within their homes while cool air drifted through narrow streets and over flat rooftops. Above everything, the stars remained. They seemed brighter now. Without the glow of evening lingering in the west, the sky revealed itself completely. Thousands upon thousands of points of light stretched across the darkness. Ancient Egyptians looked upon these same stars night after night. Farmers saw them above their fields. Fishermen saw them reflected upon the river. Temple workers saw them during early mornings and late evenings when their duties carried them outdoors. Inside the temple, silence ruled most of the halls. The building felt almost asleep. The great stone walls stood unmoving beneath the night sky. Columns cast dark shadows across courtyards. Doorways opened into chambers where only faint lamplight remained. Yet even in these quiet hours, a few responsibilities continued. Temples were places of routine. And routines rarely stopped completely. A caretaker moved slowly through one corridor carrying a small oil lamp. His footsteps echoed softly against the floor that had been washed earlier in the day. The stone felt cool beneath his sandals. The heat of afternoon was long gone now. Only the gentle coolness of night remained. The caretaker paused near a doorway. His lamp illuminated a small circle of stone. The floor appeared clean, orderly, ready for tomorrow. Satisfied, he continued onward. Such inspections were simple but important. A well-kept temple did not happen by accident. It depended upon countless small acts of attention. One person cleaned. Another repaired. Another inspected. Another organized supplies. Together, their efforts created the sense of order that visitors experienced each day. The workers who washed floors understood this. Their labor was only one thread in a much larger fabric. Beyond the temple walls, the Nile flowed quietly through the darkness. Moonlight shimmered upon the water. In some places the river appeared silver. In others it seemed almost black. The gentle movement never stopped. A fisherman returning late might guide a small boat toward shore beneath the stars. A watchman standing near a dock might hear water touching wood. The sounds were soft enough to blend into the night. The river had its own voice. Never loud. Never demanding. Always present. The temple workers knew it well. Many had grown up beside its banks. Many depended upon it every day of their lives. Water carried into the temple that morning had likely begun its journey from the Nile only a short time before. Now that same water had dried from the stone floors. The labor of the day had become part of memory. Tomorrow would bring new water. New effort. New routines. But for now, the night encouraged rest rather than work. In nearby homes, people slept closely together. Ancient houses often contained only a few rooms. Families shared space naturally. Mats rested upon floors. Blankets provided comfort during cooler nights. The sounds inside such homes were gentle. Slow breathing. Occasional movement. The quiet rustle of fabric. A child turning in sleep. Nothing more. After long days of labor, sleep often arrived quickly. The body welcomed it. Farmers slept. Bakers slept. Boatmen slept. Builders slept. Temple cleaners slept. The entire land seemed to pause beneath the stars. Only a handful of people remained awake. Guards. Watchmen. Those whose duties required wakefulness. Their presence added another layer to the quiet life of the night. Within the temple grounds, a guard stood near an entrance. His work differed greatly from that of the cleaners, yet he shared something with them. Routine. Every day brought familiar responsibilities. Every night brought familiar hours of waiting. The guard listened to distant sounds drifting through the darkness. A dog barking somewhere beyond the walls. A faint voice carried by the breeze. The rustling of palm leaves. Nothing unusual. The night remained peaceful. The temple stood secure. As midnight approached, the air became cooler still. Stone surfaces released the last remnants of daytime warmth. Courtyards felt calm and comfortable. A person standing there might almost forget the intense heat that had covered the same stones only hours earlier. Egypt often lived through such contrasts. Hot days. Cool nights. Bright afternoons. Dark peaceful evenings. The workers adapted naturally. Their lives followed these rhythms from childhood onward. Somewhere not far from the temple, one of the workers who had spent the day washing floors was likely asleep. Perhaps he rested on a woven mat beside family members. Perhaps his hands still felt slightly sore from carrying water jars. Perhaps his shoulders ached from the day's effort. Yet sleep has a way of easing such burdens. The body repairs itself quietly during the night. Muscles recover. Energy returns. The mind settles. Tomorrow's work waits patiently. There is no need to think about it while sleeping. For now, rest is enough. The moon climbed higher. Its pale light touched rooftops and walls. Certain sections of the temple courtyard glowed softly beneath it. Other sections remained hidden in shadow. The contrast created beautiful patterns across the stone. No audience stood nearby to admire them. No crowd gathered. The beauty simply existed. Silent and unnoticed. Much of the ancient world was like that. Countless peaceful moments unfolded without record. A breeze moving through palm leaves. Moonlight reflecting on water. The sound of distant birds before dawn. Ordinary scenes that no scribe considered important enough to write down. Yet they were part of daily life. Part of what it felt like to be alive in that time. The workers who cared for temple floors experienced these moments often. Their jobs began early. Sometimes before sunrise. They crossed quiet streets while stars still filled the sky. They saw dawn arrive over the river. They felt the first cool air of morning. They witnessed the city waking around them. Such experiences rarely appear in official records. Yet they formed the backdrop of countless lives. As the night continued, the temple remained still. The clean floors reflected faint moonlight where it entered open spaces. The day's work endured quietly. Dust would return eventually. Footsteps would return. Activity would return. But not yet. The temple rested. The city rested. The river flowed onward beneath the stars. Hours passed gently. Slowly. Peacefully. The darkness reached its deepest point. This was the calmest part of the night, when even the sounds of animals seemed fewer. The world felt suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Yet somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, dawn was already beginning its long journey. Invisible for now. Far away. Still hidden. But moving steadily closer. The workers sleeping in their homes did not know exactly when they would wake. Their bodies knew. Years of routine had trained them. Before long, eyes would open. Blankets would be folded. Sandals would be put on. Water jars would once again be lifted. The familiar cycle would begin anew. But those moments had not arrived yet. For now, the stars remained overhead. The Nile continued its quiet flow. The temple stood calm beneath the moon. And the clean stone floors, washed carefully by hand through a full day of patient labor, rested peacefully in the cool embrace of the ancient Egyptian night. Far to the east, beyond the river, beyond the fields, beyond a distant line where earth met sky, the first hidden signs of dawn were beginning to appear. The night still seemed complete. The stars still filled the heavens. The moon still cast its pale light upon rooftops and temple walls. Yet the world was already changing. Very slowly. Almost invisibly. This was one of the quietest moments in the entire day. A moment that belonged neither to night nor to morning. A moment suspended between sleep and wakefulness. Across Egypt, most people remained asleep. Within small mud-brick homes, families rested beneath woven coverings. The air had cooled pleasantly during the night. Rooms that had felt warm during the afternoon were now comfortable and still. The silence felt deep. Only occasional sounds disturbed it. A sleeping animal shifting its weight. A distant dog. The faint whisper of wind moving through palm fronds. Then quiet again. Near the temple, narrow streets rested in darkness. The dust that had been stirred by countless feet during the previous day now lay undisturbed. Market stalls stood empty. Workshops sat silent. Boats rested beside the riverbank. Everything waited. Inside the temple, the stillness seemed even greater. The massive stone structure held the cool air of the night. Courtyards stood empty beneath the stars. Columns cast long shadows across clean floors. The work completed the previous day remained visible even in the dim light. The stone appeared calm. Orderly. Prepared for another day. A guard moved slowly through one of the outer passages. His lamp burned low now. The flame flickered softly whenever a breeze found its way through the corridor. He had spent much of the night listening to silence. Watching. Waiting. Guard duty often involved long stretches during which very little happened. The hours passed quietly. The stars crossed the sky. The air cooled and then slowly began warming again. The temple remained secure. The guard knew these rhythms well. Night after night, they repeated themselves. In a nearby neighborhood, one of the temple workers stirred in his sleep. Not fully awake. Not yet. Only shifting slightly as the body sensed the approach of morning. Many laborers developed this awareness over years of repetition. They rose before dawn so often that their bodies learned the schedule. The coming day gently called them toward wakefulness even before sunlight appeared. For now, however, sleep still held them. The Nile flowed onward through the darkness. Moonlight shimmered across its surface. The river seemed almost dreamlike at this hour. Its movement was steady and silent. Boats tied along the shore rocked gently against their moorings. The water touched wood with soft sounds that barely disturbed the quiet. A fisherman sleeping nearby might hear these sounds without fully waking. They had become part of life. Part of the familiar music of the river. The temple stood not far away. Its clean floors rested beneath layers of shadow. Hours earlier those same floors had echoed with footsteps, splashing water, and the steady work of laborers carrying jars from place to place. Now they were silent. The difference felt remarkable. Buildings often seemed to possess two lives. One during the busy hours. Another during the quiet ones. The temple's daytime life was full of movement. Its nighttime life belonged to stillness. Both felt equally natural. As the deepest darkness slowly began to fade, the stars nearest the eastern horizon lost a little of their brightness. The change was subtle. A person had to watch carefully to notice it. Most people remained asleep. Only those already awake could witness the gradual transformation. The guard near the temple entrance noticed. So did a few boatmen preparing for an early departure. So did birds resting among palm trees. Nature often senses dawn before humans do. One bird called softly. Then silence returned. A few moments later, another answered from somewhere farther away. The first voices of morning had begun. Inside homes, people still slept. Yet the atmosphere was changing. The coolness of night carried a slightly different feeling now. Not warmer. Not yet. Simply touched by the promise of sunrise. The temple seemed to sense it too. The darkness inside its halls no longer felt quite as deep. Shapes became easier to distinguish. Columns emerged gradually from shadow. Doorways appeared more clearly. The building was waking slowly. The same way a person wakes. Not all at once. A little at a time. In one modest home, a temple worker opened his eyes. For a few moments he remained still. The room around him was quiet. Family members continued sleeping nearby. The familiar ceiling rested above him. Outside, the world remained dark. Yet he knew it was time. Years of routine had taught him. His body understood. Another day had begun. Slowly he sat up. His muscles felt the memory of yesterday's labor. A slight stiffness remained in his shoulders. His hands felt rough. His back reminded him of countless hours spent carrying water and kneeling upon stone. Such sensations were familiar companions. He paid them little attention. The day awaited. Across the city, other workers were waking as well. Farmers, fishermen, bakers, potters, builders. People whose lives followed the rhythm of labor. The first moments of morning belonged to them. The wealthy could often sleep longer. Workers rarely had that luxury. The day started early. Especially during warm seasons. As the worker prepared for another morning, the sky outside continued brightening almost imperceptibly. The stars remained visible overhead. Yet fewer appeared near the eastern horizon. The darkness was slowly retreating. Not because it was being chased away. Simply because another day was arriving. The process felt gentle. Patient. Unhurried. Much like the river itself. The worker stepped outside his home. The air felt cool against his skin. For a moment he stood quietly. The streets remained mostly empty. A few distant figures moved through the darkness. Others would soon join them. The city was beginning to stir. He adjusted his sandals. Looked toward the temple. Then started walking. His footsteps sounded softly against the dusty ground. The path felt familiar. He had traveled it countless times before. Every turn. Every building. Every stretch of road. The route had become part of him. Ahead, the temple waited. The same temple he had left the previous evening. The same floors he had helped wash. The same halls that would soon fill with activity once more. Around him, the first signs of morning continued appearing. Birds called more frequently now. A faint breeze carried the scent of river water. The eastern sky grew slightly lighter. The day remained hidden, but its arrival was certain. Other workers emerged from nearby homes. Some carried jars. Others carried tools. A few exchanged quiet greetings as they passed. Their voices remained low. The morning felt too peaceful for loud conversation. Together they moved through the half-light toward another day of work. Toward another day of routine. Toward another day of carrying water across cool stone floors. The temple rose before them, calm and silent beneath the fading stars. Soon its halls would echo once again with footsteps. Soon water would splash across ancient stone. Soon the familiar labor would begin anew. But for a few precious moments, before the sun appeared above the horizon, everything remained quiet. The city was waking. The river was flowing. The workers were returning. And the temple, resting after a peaceful night beneath the stars, waited patiently for the first touch of morning. The eastern horizon slowly brightened. At first it was only a faint glow, barely noticeable against the lingering darkness. Yet with every passing moment the light grew a little stronger. The stars nearest the horizon faded one by one, surrendering their place to the approaching day. The workers continued their walk toward the temple. The roads remained quiet. Dust rested undisturbed beneath their sandals. Cool air drifted across the land. The heat that would later dominate the day still felt very far away. This was one of the most pleasant times in Egypt. The hours before sunrise carried a special kind of peace. The world felt fresh, untouched. For a short while, it seemed as though everything paused between yesterday's labor and today's responsibilities. The workers appreciated these moments even if they rarely spoke about them. Many had spent years waking before dawn. The routine had become part of their lives. Yet familiar things can still bring comfort. The cool air, the fading stars, the quiet streets, the first sounds of birds greeting the morning. These small experiences accompanied them day after day. Ahead, the temple slowly emerged from the darkness. Its outline became clearer as the sky brightened. The massive walls appeared first. Then the towering columns. Then the broad entrance. The structure seemed to rise naturally from the earth itself. Solid. Patient. Unchanging. Many of the workers had known it their entire lives. Some could scarcely remember a time when it had not stood there. The temple greeted each dawn exactly as it had greeted countless dawns before. Without words. Without movement. Simply by being present. As the first workers arrived, the grounds remained quiet. Only a few guards and caretakers were already awake within the complex. Soft greetings passed between familiar faces. Nothing elaborate. Simple acknowledgements shared by people who saw one another almost every day. The workers entered the temple. The stone beneath their feet felt wonderfully cool after the night. The air inside still carried traces of darkness. Certain corridors remained dim. Certain chambers rested in shadow. Yet morning was already finding its way inward. Small beams of pale light entered through openings high above. The temple was beginning to wake. Water jars arrived soon after. Some had been filled before dawn. Others were carried directly from nearby storage areas. The familiar work was about to begin again. The workers moved with practiced efficiency. No one needed instructions. Everyone understood their role. Years of repetition had made the routine almost effortless. A younger laborer carried cloths into a side chamber. An older worker inspected the floors. Another arranged jars near a courtyard entrance. Each task connected naturally to the next. The rhythm of the day was returning. One of the workers paused briefly near a column. The stone felt cool when he touched it. Above him, carved images covered the walls. Birds. Plants. Animals. Figures from stories passed down through generations. Morning light slowly revealed them. The carvings emerged from darkness little by little, as though awakening alongside the temple itself. Soon the first water touched the floor. A small splash echoed softly through the hall. The sound felt familiar, comforting even. The beginning of another working day. Another splash followed. Then another. Before long, the quiet sounds of cleaning spread throughout the temple. Water poured. Cloths moved across stone. Footsteps echoed through corridors. The day had begun. Outside, the horizon brightened further. The first edge of the sun had not yet appeared, but its arrival was near. Birds became more active. Their calls drifted through open spaces and courtyards. Some perched upon temple walls. Others crossed the sky above the river. The world was filling with life once more. The workers focused on their tasks. Water loosened dust that had settled overnight. Cloths removed fine layers of sand carried in by the breeze. Corners received careful attention. Passageways were inspected. The same work performed yesterday now unfolded again. Yet it never felt exactly identical. Conditions changed slightly. The wind behaved differently. More dust gathered in one place, less in another. Every day contained small variations. The workers learned to notice them. A man kneeling beside a long hallway worked slowly and steadily. The stone beneath him bore the marks of many generations. Thousands of sandals had crossed this floor. Thousands of people had walked this corridor. Some had arrived carrying offerings. Others delivering messages. Others performing duties much like his own. The floor held the memory of countless footsteps. Now it received another morning of care. As dawn expanded across the land, sunlight finally appeared above the horizon. A narrow band of gold emerged in the east. The first direct rays touched distant fields. Then rooftops. Then palm trees. Then the upper portions of the temple walls. The transformation happened gradually. Light spread gently across the landscape. No sudden change. Only a steady arrival. Inside the temple, golden beams entered through openings near the roof. Dust drifting through the air became visible. Tiny particles floated lazily in the light. The scene felt peaceful. Almost dreamlike. One worker watched for a moment before returning to his task. The work always came first. Yet small moments of beauty often appeared unexpectedly. The temple offered many such moments. The scent of the morning also changed. Fresh water mixed with cool stone. A faint trace of incense lingered from previous ceremonies. The smell of oil lamps faded as daylight strengthened. Together these scents created an atmosphere unique to the early hours. A visitor entering the temple at dawn would have noticed immediately. The building possessed its own character. Its own quiet presence. Outside the walls, the city was waking more fully. Smoke began rising from cooking fires. Families prepared morning meals. Bakers started their work. The smell of fresh bread drifted through neighborhoods. Donkeys moved through streets carrying goods. Voices became more common. The silence of night was giving way to the activity of day. Yet inside the temple, the mood remained calm. The workers moved steadily through the halls. No one rushed. There was no need. The day stretched ahead of them. The tasks would be completed in their proper time. A young laborer carried a full water jar across a courtyard. The weight pressed against his shoulder. The journey was familiar. He had made it many times before. Still, the effort remained real. Water was heavy. Every trip demanded strength. Ancient labor often depended upon such simple physical effort. Carry. Lift. Walk. Repeat. Again and again. The body became accustomed to it. Not because it grew easier, but because it became familiar. As the sun climbed higher, more sections of the temple received attention. Water spread across stone. Cloths moved methodically. Dust disappeared. The building slowly transformed from the quiet stillness of night into the ordered cleanliness expected of a sacred place. The workers knew their responsibilities well. Each movement connected them to countless workers who had come before. Men and women whose names had vanished long ago. People who had risen before dawn. Carried water. Washed stone. Then returned home to rest before doing it all again. The cycle continued across generations. Morning after morning. Year after year. The temple endured. The river flowed. The workers came and went. And as sunlight spread across ancient Egypt once more, the familiar sounds of water and careful labor echoed through the halls, beginning another peaceful day beside the Nile. The morning unfolded gently across the temple grounds. Sunlight continued its slow climb into the sky. What had begun as pale gold along the horizon now spread across walls, courtyards, and rooftops. The coolness of dawn still lingered in shaded places, though everyone knew it would not last forever. For now, the air remained pleasant. The workers welcomed it. Many had already spent several hours carrying water, arranging supplies, and beginning the first rounds of cleaning. Their day was fully underway, even while much of the city was only now becoming busy. The temple seemed alive once more. Not with noise or excitement, but with steady activity. Footsteps moved through corridors. Water splashed softly against stone. Voices drifted occasionally from distant chambers. The sounds blended together into a familiar rhythm that had existed for generations. One worker crossed a courtyard carrying a clay jar balanced carefully against his shoulder. The vessel was heavy. Its rounded sides pressed against his arm as he walked. Every step required attention. The stone beneath his sandals was smooth in some places and uneven in others. He knew the path well. Years of repetition had taught him exactly where to place his feet. The jar contained water drawn from storage containers filled earlier in the morning. Soon that water would be poured across another section of floor. Soon another hallway would receive the same careful attention given to countless hallways before it. The work continued. Nearby, a younger laborer knelt beside a long stretch of stone that connected two sections of the temple. His cloth moved steadily back and forth. There was no hurry. No dramatic effort. Only patience. The stone gradually changed beneath his hands. Dust disappeared. Small traces of dirt vanished. The floor regained its clean appearance. Such changes happened quietly. A visitor might not notice them immediately. Yet the workers noticed. The temple noticed. Care leaves its mark, even when that mark is subtle. Morning light entered through openings high above. As it crossed the floor, it illuminated sections already cleaned. The stone reflected the sunlight softly. Not brightly. Not sharply. Just enough to reveal the care that had gone into maintaining it. The workers moved through the shifting patterns of light and shadow. At times they stood in full sunlight. At other moments they worked beneath cool shade cast by enormous columns. These columns had watched countless mornings arrive. They had stood through seasons of flood and drought. Through years of prosperity and years of hardship. People changed. The temple endured. One older worker paused briefly to stretch his back. The movement was small and familiar. Years of labor leave their traces upon the body. He could feel them each morning. The stiffness in his shoulders. The ache in his knees. The roughness of his hands. These things had become part of daily life. Yet he continued working. Not because it was easy. Because it was necessary. Most ancient labor followed this simple truth. The work had to be done. And so it was done. Outside the temple walls, the city had fully awakened. The roads carried more people now. Merchants opened their stalls. Craftsmen prepared workshops. Children assisted with chores before the heat of midday arrived. The smell of bread drifted through the streets. Fresh loaves emerged from ovens warmed before sunrise. The scent traveled surprisingly far. Even within portions of the temple, workers occasionally caught traces of it carried by the breeze. A simple smell, yet one that often reminded people of home, of family, of meals waiting at the end of the day. The thought of food visited many workers during long mornings. Physical labor demanded energy. Hours spent carrying water and scrubbing stone gradually emptied the body's reserves. Meals mattered. Even simple ones. Bread, vegetables, dates, fish when available. These foods sustained the people whose efforts kept daily life moving. A worker washing a floor might already be thinking about the meal he would eat later. Not because he was distracted. Simply because hunger follows hard work naturally. Inside one chamber, sunlight reached a carved wall for the first time that morning. The change happened slowly. A beam of light touched the upper edge of the stone, then moved downward. Figures carved centuries earlier emerged from shadow. Birds appeared. Plants appeared. Human forms became visible. The artwork seemed to awaken with the day. The workers passed these carvings so often that they rarely studied them. Yet the carvings remained part of their surroundings. A constant presence. As familiar as the floors they cleaned. The temple possessed countless details like this. Small elements that became invisible through familiarity. A visitor might marvel at them. A worker simply walked past. This is often how life works. The extraordinary becomes ordinary when seen every day. As the morning progressed, the amount of movement within the temple increased. More people arrived. Messengers crossed courtyards. Officials moved through hallways. Scribes carried writing materials. Servants transported supplies. Every person added a little more activity to the building. Every sandal brought a little more dust. The workers understood this. They never expected the floors to remain perfectly clean. Their task was not to defeat dust forever. Such a thing would have been impossible. Their task was to maintain order. To care for the space. To begin each day with cleanliness and attention. That was enough. One laborer poured water carefully along the edge of a corridor. The liquid spread across the stone in a thin sheet. Morning light reflected upon its surface. For a few moments the floor appeared almost mirror-like. Then cloths followed. Water was guided away. The stone dried gradually. Another section completed. Another small piece of the temple cared for. The process repeated endlessly. Yet repetition did not make it meaningless. Many of the most important tasks in life are repetitive. Eating, sleeping, cooking, growing food, maintaining buildings. These activities continue because they are necessary. The workers understood this deeply. Their labor formed part of a cycle larger than themselves. A cycle that connected people across generations. The same floors had been washed by others before them. Others would wash them after they were gone. The work belonged to no single person. It belonged to the temple. It belonged to time itself. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The coolness of early morning began to fade. The first hints of heat returned to the air. Workers noticed immediately. Sweat appeared more quickly. Water jars felt slightly heavier. The promise of another warm day settled over the land. Still, the most comfortable hours had not yet completely passed. There was time before midday arrived. Time to complete more work. Time to move through the halls while the stone remained relatively cool. A gentle breeze entered through one courtyard. Palm leaves beyond the walls rustled softly. The sound drifted inward. Several workers noticed. No one commented. There was no need. The breeze spoke for itself. Moments like these were small gifts during a working day. A cooler breath of air. A patch of shade. A brief opportunity to rest aching muscles. Ancient laborers learned to appreciate such things. As the morning continued, the temple floors slowly transformed beneath countless careful movements. Water flowed. Cloths moved. Dust disappeared. The building became cleaner with each passing hour. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. Just as dawn becomes day. Just as the river shapes its banks. Gradually. Patiently. Steadily. And while the Nile flowed beyond the fields, and while merchants opened shops and farmers tended crops beneath the strengthening sun, the workers inside the temple continued their quiet labor, washing ancient stone by hand and guiding another peaceful morning toward the long hours that still lay ahead. The morning continued to deepen. The sun rose higher above the Nile Valley, casting broader light across the land. Shadows that had stretched long and thin during dawn now began to shorten. The cool air of early morning was slowly giving way to the familiar warmth that accompanied nearly every day in Egypt. Inside the temple, the workers carried on with their routines. The steady rhythm established before sunrise remained unchanged. Water jars arrived. Cloths moved across stone. Dust was lifted away. Footsteps echoed through halls that had already witnessed countless mornings much like this one. One worker carefully crossed a wide courtyard carrying fresh water. The clay jar rested against his shoulder. Its weight pressed firmly into muscle and bone. He adjusted his grip slightly but never stopped walking. The path ahead was familiar. Years of repetition had made these movements almost instinctive. He knew where the floor dipped slightly. He knew where sunlight first reached the stone. He knew which corridors gathered the most dust overnight. Knowledge like this accumulated slowly. Not from instruction. Not from written records. But from daily experience. The temple taught its workers little by little. Morning after morning. Year after year. Nearby, another laborer knelt beside a row of columns. The stone beneath him felt cooler than the open courtyard outside. Shade still lingered there. For now. Later in the day, even these sheltered places would warm. But the morning offered a brief gift of comfort. The worker moved his cloth steadily across the floor. Back and forth. Back and forth. The motion had become second nature. His hands hardly needed guidance. The body remembered what to do. Much of ancient labor relied upon this kind of memory. Tasks repeated so often that they became part of a person. A farmer knew how to guide a plow. A fisherman knew how to cast a net. A baker knew how dough should feel beneath the fingers. Temple cleaners knew how water moved across stone. These skills were learned through doing. Not through explanation. The temple itself seemed brighter now. Sunlight entered through high openings and spread across the halls. Dust suspended in the air became visible where the beams touched it. Tiny particles drifted slowly, turning and floating almost lazily. The workers noticed them only occasionally. Dust was simply part of life. The desert never rested. Even on calm days, fine grains found their way into buildings. Onto floors. Onto shelves. Onto clothing. Every morning brought a fresh layer. Every morning demanded fresh effort. Outside the temple walls, activity increased throughout the city. The roads became busier. More merchants opened their stalls. More customers appeared. Donkeys carried loads through narrow streets. Craftsmen settled into workshops where another day of labor awaited. Potters shaped clay. Carpenters worked with wood. Weavers tended looms. The entire city seemed to awaken fully beneath the growing sun. Yet within the temple, the atmosphere remained calmer. There was activity, certainly. But it moved at a measured pace. The stone walls softened outside noise. The broad halls created space for quiet. Even when many people occupied the building, parts of it still felt peaceful. One of the workers appreciated these quieter sections. A narrow passage near the rear of the temple often remained empty during the early hours. Few visitors passed through. Few officials had business there. The corridor belonged mostly to the workers. The air felt cool. The silence felt deep. Only the occasional splash of water disturbed it. Such places offered small moments of calm within a busy day. Not rest exactly. The work continued. But the atmosphere felt gentler. As the sun climbed higher, warmth slowly spread across the stone. The workers felt it first through their sandals. Then through the air around them. The change was gradual. Yet impossible to miss. Morning was advancing. The most comfortable hours were slipping away. Before long, the heat would settle over the land. Everyone understood this. Farmers understood it. Builders understood it. Temple workers understood it. The timing of labor often depended upon the movement of the sun. Many tasks were easier before midday. For this reason, the workers remained steady. There was still much to accomplish. One laborer paused briefly beside a water jar. He dipped a small cup and took a drink. The water felt cool against his throat. A simple pleasure. One that became increasingly valuable as the day warmed. Nearby, another worker did the same. Then both returned to their duties. No conversation was necessary. The work spoke for itself. The temple floor stretched onward through corridors and chambers. Each section required attention. Each section demanded patience. As the morning continued, visitors began arriving in greater numbers. Their sandals crossed the very floors that had been cleaned only hours earlier. The workers watched without frustration. This was expected. A clean floor exists to be walked upon. Dust exists to be removed. The cycle continued endlessly. There was something comforting about its predictability. The same patterns repeated day after day. Yet life never felt entirely identical. Small differences always appeared. A stronger breeze. A busier morning. A different arrangement of sunlight. These little changes prevented routine from becoming completely invisible. One young worker noticed a bird perched upon a wall near an open courtyard. For a moment he watched it. The bird tilted its head. Looked around. Then suddenly lifted into the air and disappeared above the temple roof. The moment lasted only seconds. Then the worker returned to his task. Such brief observations often punctuated long hours of labor. A bird. A breeze. A changing shadow. Tiny events that added texture to the day. The smell inside the temple shifted subtly as the hours passed. Fresh water mingled with warm stone. Incense drifted faintly from distant chambers. The scent of oil lamps had mostly disappeared now that daylight filled the building. Together these smells formed an atmosphere unique to the temple. A person who spent years working there would recognize it instantly. Every place develops such familiar qualities. A home. A workshop. A boat. A temple. The senses remember them. As the sun approached the middle of the sky, the brightness outside intensified. Courtyards gleamed beneath the light. Stone surfaces reflected warmth. The workers felt sweat appearing more quickly upon their skin. The day was becoming harder. Not unbearable. Not yet. But the approach of midday was unmistakable. Even so, the labor continued without interruption. Water splashed across stone. Cloths moved steadily. Footsteps crossed the halls. The same patient rhythm carried onward. An older worker inspected a section completed earlier. The floor looked clean. Orderly. Ready for another day of use. He nodded slightly and continued walking. The gesture was small. Almost unnoticed. Yet it reflected years of experience. He knew what good work looked like. He knew the value of consistency. In many ways, consistency mattered more than speed. A careful worker could be trusted. The temple depended upon such people. Around him, the building carried on with its own daily life. Scribes moved through shaded corridors. Servants transported supplies. Visitors came and went. The temple functioned because many different forms of labor happened together. The floor cleaners were only one part of that larger picture. Yet their contribution touched every corner of the building. Every person who entered walked upon the results of their effort. As the morning edged closer to midday, sunlight poured through the courtyards with growing strength. The stone grew warmer. The air became heavier. The promise of afternoon heat approached steadily from hour to hour. Still the workers moved calmly through the temple, carrying water from place to place, washing ancient floors by hand, and continuing the quiet routines that had shaped countless days beside the Nile. By the time the sun neared the middle of the sky, the character of the day had changed once again. The gentle coolness of dawn was now only a memory. Warmth covered the land. The bright Egyptian sun shone down upon fields, roads, rooftops, and temple walls. The light seemed to reach everywhere. Courtyards glowed beneath it. Open pathways reflected it. Even the river carried its brightness across the surface of the water. Inside the temple, the workers felt the change clearly. The stone floors that had seemed cool and refreshing during the early morning were beginning to absorb heat. The air moved more slowly. Sweat appeared more easily upon foreheads and arms. Yet the temple still offered refuge. Its massive walls softened the worst effects of the sun. Its covered halls provided shade. Its deep chambers remained noticeably cooler than the world outside. The workers appreciated these spaces. A shaded corridor could feel like a gift during the warmest part of the day. One laborer carried a water jar through such a corridor now. The cool air brushed gently against his skin. For a few moments, the burden on his shoulders seemed lighter. The relief was small. But small comforts mattered. Ancient labor was often built upon small comforts. A patch of shade. A breeze. A drink of water. A chance to sit briefly before returning to work. The worker continued onward. The jar sloshed softly with each step. The sound echoed faintly against the stone walls. He knew exactly where he was going. Years of repetition had made the route familiar. Many of the workers could navigate the temple almost without thinking. Their feet remembered the paths. Their eyes recognized every corner. Their bodies understood the building. Outside the temple grounds, the city moved through its own midday routines. Merchants stood beneath awnings and simple coverings to escape direct sunlight. Farmers worked steadily in the fields, though many took advantage of whatever shade they could find. Animals gathered beneath trees. Even birds seemed quieter during the hottest hours. The heat encouraged patience. It slowed everything slightly. The entire landscape appeared calmer beneath the bright sky. Within the temple, cleaning continued. One section at a time. One hallway at a time. One courtyard at a time. The process never felt dramatic. There were no sudden transformations. Only gradual improvement. A dusty floor became a clean floor. A neglected corner became an orderly corner. The workers measured progress through small changes. And those small changes accumulated throughout the day. Near a large column, an older worker knelt carefully beside the stone floor. His movements were slower than those of younger laborers. Not because he lacked skill. Quite the opposite. Years of experience had taught him not to waste effort. Every motion had purpose. Every action served the task. The cloth moved steadily beneath his hands. The floor responded. Dust disappeared. The stone regained its appearance. The work required patience more than strength. As he worked, sunlight shifted slowly across the courtyard. The shadow cast by the column shortened little by little. The worker barely noticed. The movement was too gradual. Yet over the course of an hour, the difference became obvious. The sun marked the passage of time in quiet ways. The workers learned to read those signs. Many could estimate the hours simply by observing the position of light and shadow. Such knowledge developed naturally. The sky became a kind of clock. A reliable companion throughout life. A younger laborer crossed the courtyard carrying fresh cloths. His sandals tapped lightly against the stone. The sound blended with countless other small sounds. The splash of water. The scrape of fabric. The distant voices of people moving through the temple. Together they created a gentle background rhythm. Not loud. Not distracting. Simply the sound of daily life. One of the remarkable things about the temple was how many different activities happened at once. A cleaner washed the floor. A scribe prepared documents. A servant transported supplies. A messenger carried information. A visitor crossed a hallway. Each person followed a different purpose. Yet all shared the same space. The temple functioned because many kinds of labor worked together. No single task stood alone. Everything connected. The floor cleaners rarely thought about this directly. They were too busy performing their duties. Yet their work supported everyone else. A clean and orderly environment made every other activity easier. As midday approached fully, the brightness outside became intense. The courtyard seemed almost white beneath the sun. Stone surfaces reflected light upward. The air shimmered above certain sections of ground. The workers felt sweat gathering more quickly now. Water became even more important. Several laborers paused briefly to drink. The cool liquid eased dry throats. For a moment, fatigue retreated. Then the work resumed. The temple itself seemed quieter during these hottest hours. Visitors moved more slowly. Conversations remained subdued. The heat encouraged calm behavior. People conserved energy. The building settled into a slower rhythm. This suited the workers. There was comfort in steady, unhurried labor. A man carrying water did not need to rush. The jar would arrive when it arrived. The floor would be cleaned when it was cleaned. Ancient work often followed this philosophy. The day was long. Patience mattered. Rushing only created exhaustion. One worker passed through a chamber where sunlight entered from a narrow opening above. The beam of light cut through the dimness and illuminated floating dust. Tiny particles drifted like golden specks in the air, The sight lasted only a moment as he walked by. Yet it remained quietly beautiful. Many such scenes appeared throughout the day. Most passed unnoticed. Life contains countless small moments of beauty hidden within ordinary routines. The workers experienced them regularly. A reflection upon water. A bird crossing the sky. A beam of sunlight upon stone. Simple things, yet memorable. Beyond the temple walls, the Nile continued its steady journey. Boats crossed the water. Fishermen worked patiently. The river glimmered beneath the bright afternoon sun. Its presence could be felt throughout the city. Even when hidden from view, it remained nearby. Its water sustained fields, filled jars, supported livelihoods, connected communities. The workers cleaning temple floors depended upon it as much as anyone. Without the Nile, there would be no water to carry, no floors to wash, no city thriving beside its banks. The river quietly supported everything. Inside the temple, the labor carried on. The morning's progress became visible everywhere. Hallways looked cleaner. Courtyards looked fresher. Stone surfaces reflected light differently. The effects were subtle, yet unmistakable. Care changes a place. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. The workers understood this through experience. They saw it every day. As the sun reached its highest point, a stillness settled briefly over the land. The hottest part of the day had arrived. The air seemed to pause. The brightness felt almost overwhelming in open spaces. Even the breeze appeared reluctant to move. Yet within the shaded halls of the temple, work continued. Water splashed softly against stone. Cloths moved with practiced rhythm. Footsteps echoed through ancient corridors. The workers remained patient. The hours would pass. The heat would eventually ease. The shadows would lengthen again. But for now, midday ruled the sky. And beneath its brilliant light, the men who washed the temple floors by hand continued their quiet labor, moving steadily through cool corridors and shaded chambers while the great river flowed patiently beyond the walls of the ancient city. Midday lingered over the Nile Valley. The sun stood high above the land, pouring light across every open surface. The brightness seemed almost endless. Fields shimmered in the distance. Roads appeared pale beneath the heat. The stone walls of the temple glowed softly beneath the clear sky. For those working outdoors, this was often the most demanding part of the day. Yet inside the temple, conditions remained gentler. The thick walls and shaded halls offered protection from the full strength of the sun. The air was warm, certainly, but many chambers still felt cooler than the streets outside. The workers appreciated this without needing to say so. They had spent enough years moving through these spaces to understand their value. One laborer crossed a long corridor carrying a jar that was only half full. The weight remained substantial. Water always carried weight. Even after years of lifting jars, the effort never truly disappeared. The body became stronger. The movements became more efficient. Yet the water remained water. Heavy. Necessary. Precious. He walked slowly and steadily. There was no reason to hurry. His sandals made soft sounds against the stone floor. The echoes traveled ahead of him and faded into the distance. The corridor seemed almost empty. Quiet. Peaceful. In another section of the temple, a younger worker knelt beside a broad stretch of flooring where visitors often passed. This area required extra attention. Many feet crossed it every day. Dust gathered quickly. Tiny bits of sand found their way into every corner. The worker dipped his cloth into water and began another careful pass across the stone. Back and forth. Back and forth. The motion was simple. Yet there was something calming about its repetition. The same movement. The same rhythm. The same gradual improvement. The floor became cleaner little by little. Much of life in ancient Egypt followed similar patterns. Fields were tended one row at a time. Bread was prepared one loaf at a time. Walls were built one stone at a time. Temple floors were cleaned one section at a time. Large accomplishments often emerged from countless small efforts. The workers understood this through experience rather than philosophy. It was simply how life worked. A faint breeze entered one of the courtyards. The movement of air was barely noticeable at first. Then it became slightly stronger. Workers passing nearby welcomed it immediately. The breeze carried the scent of warm stone and distant water. For a few moments, the atmosphere felt lighter. Then the air settled once more. Such brief moments of relief were treasured during warm days. Not because conditions were unbearable, but because small comforts become meaningful during long hours of labor. Across the city, many people were reaching the midpoint of their own workdays. Farmers checked irrigation channels. Boatmen guided vessels along the river. Potters shaped clay beneath shaded work areas. Weavers sat beside looms. The entire city moved according to rhythms established over generations. Everyone understood the day. Everyone understood the seasons. Life followed patterns that felt dependable. The temple workers were part of that larger rhythm. Their duties connected them not only to the building itself but also to the wider world beyond its walls. The water they carried came from the river. The jars they used had been shaped by potters. The cloths they handled had been produced through careful labor. Nothing existed alone. Everything depended upon something else. Inside a shaded chamber near the rear of the temple, the atmosphere felt remarkably calm. The sounds of the city barely reached this place. Even activity within the temple seemed distant. A worker cleaning the floor there might hear only the soft movement of water and the quiet sound of breathing. The chamber felt removed from the world. Almost timeless. The stone walls carried the coolness of shade. The carvings seemed to watch silently from every side. Hours could pass gently in such places. Work continued. Yet the mind often wandered. A laborer might think about family. About crops. About an upcoming festival. Or perhaps about nothing at all. The repetitive nature of the work created space for quiet thoughts. The body performed familiar tasks while the mind drifted where it wished. Outside, the sun remained strong. The brightness showed little sign of weakening. Yet time continued moving forward. Slowly. Patiently. The workers noticed subtle changes. The shadows cast by columns had begun lengthening again. Only slightly. Barely enough to attract attention. Still, the change was there. Afternoon would arrive eventually. The heat would soften. The light would grow warmer. For now, however, midday remained in command. One of the older workers paused beside a storage area where additional water jars were kept. Several stood in neat rows against a wall. Some were full. Others had already been emptied. Together they told the story of the day. Every empty jar represented effort completed. Every full jar represented effort still ahead. The worker rested briefly in the shade. Then lifted another vessel and continued onward. The routine never truly stopped. Not because anyone demanded endless activity, but because the work itself required persistence. Temple floors did not clean themselves. Dust did not remove itself. The workers supplied the attention that kept the building orderly. As the hours passed, sections cleaned earlier in the day dried completely. The stone looked different once the water had disappeared. The surfaces appeared smooth and cared for. Sunlight reflected gently from them. The effects were modest. Yet anyone familiar with the temple could see the difference. Care leaves traces. Even when those traces are subtle. A young worker crossed paths with an older one in a narrow hallway. They exchanged a few quiet words. Perhaps they discussed supplies. Perhaps they spoke about the weather. Perhaps they simply acknowledged one another. Then both continued their duties. Such interactions occurred throughout the day. Brief moments of human connection woven into long hours of labor. Most conversations were simple. Ancient people spent much of their time discussing practical matters. The concerns of daily life. Food. Work. Family. Weather. These topics shaped ordinary existence. As the afternoon slowly approached, sounds from outside began changing. The city remained active, but the character of the noise shifted. The sharp energy of morning had faded. People moved more deliberately. The heat encouraged patience. Voices seemed quieter. Movements slower. The entire landscape appeared to settle into a calmer mood. Inside the temple, the workers mirrored this rhythm. Their pace remained steady. Measured. Comfortable. No one rushed through the corridors. No one hurried across the courtyards. The day was unfolding exactly as expected. One task after another. One hallway after another. One water jar after another. The familiar cycle continued. High above, sunlight entered through openings in the roof and cast bright shapes upon the floor. These shapes moved almost imperceptibly across the stone. A worker could spend hours in the same chamber and only gradually notice how far the light had traveled. Time revealed itself through these quiet changes. A shifting shadow. A cooling breeze. A different quality of light. The temple marked the passing hours without any need for clocks. As midday slowly began its journey toward afternoon, the workers carried on with patient determination. Their hands moved across ancient stone. Water flowed from jar to floor. Dust disappeared beneath careful effort. And beyond the temple walls, where the Nile continued its endless course through the heart of Egypt, the bright day moved forward beneath the sun, carrying workers, farmers, fishermen, and families together through another peaceful chapter of ordinary life in the ancient world. The afternoon arrived so gradually that few people would have noticed the exact moment it began. The sun still shone brightly above the Nile Valley, yet something in the quality of the light had changed. The harsh brilliance of midday softened ever so slightly. Shadows that had nearly disappeared beneath the highest sun now began their slow return. Inside the temple, the workers continued their routines. The hours had already been long. Many had been awake since well before dawn. They had carried countless jars of water. They had crossed endless stretches of stone. They had knelt, lifted, walked, and repeated the same careful movements over and over again. Fatigue was beginning to settle into their muscles. Not suddenly. Not heavily. Just a gradual awareness of effort accumulated throughout the day. An older laborer straightened his back after finishing a section of floor. For a moment he stood quietly. The chamber around him felt cool compared to the courtyard outside. A faint breeze drifted through a doorway. The worker closed his eyes briefly and enjoyed the sensation. Then he bent once more and returned to his task. The temple required patience. Patience often mattered more than strength. One careful movement accomplished more than several hurried ones. The experienced workers understood this deeply. The floor beneath them had existed for generations. It would continue existing long after their own lives had ended. There was no reason to rush. The work would be completed through steady effort. As always, across the temple grounds, sunlight shifted little by little. The great columns cast longer shadows now. The shaded portions of courtyards expanded. Workers moving through open spaces naturally chose routes where the shade lingered. Even a small difference in temperature felt welcome. Ancient laborers became experts at finding comfort where they could. A patch of shade. A cool wall. A breeze moving through a corridor. Such things mattered. One young worker carried a fresh jar toward a hall near the center of the temple. The weight pressed into his shoulder. He adjusted the vessel slightly and continued walking. The route was familiar. Every doorway. Every turn. Every uneven stone. His feet seemed to know the way without conscious thought. Repetition creates a special kind of knowledge. The body remembers. The hands remember. The muscles remember. Years of routine become woven into movement itself. Nearby, another worker was cleaning along the base of a carved wall. The carvings stretched far above his head. Rows of figures, animals, and symbols covered the stone. The afternoon light revealed some details while hiding others. As shadows shifted, different parts of the artwork emerged into view. The effect changed throughout the day. Morning revealed one set of shapes. Evening revealed another. The walls seemed almost alive in their own quiet way. Yet the worker paid little attention. He had seen these carvings thousands of times. Familiarity had made them part of the background of life. Outside the temple, the city continued its daily activities. Merchants welcomed customers beneath shaded stalls. Potters worked carefully with clay. Weavers sat beside looms. Boatmen guided vessels along the river. The pace of activity remained steady. The afternoon heat encouraged patience but did not stop the work. Life continued. It always did. The workers inside the temple belonged to this larger world. Though their duties took place within stone walls, their lives extended beyond them. They returned each evening to homes and families. They purchased food in markets. They walked the same roads as everyone else. The temple was where they worked, not where they lived. Yet so many hours were spent there that its halls became deeply familiar. Certain corners felt almost personal. Certain corridors carried memories of countless days. A worker might remember cleaning the same section of floor years earlier. Might remember walking beside a fellow laborer who was no longer there. The building accumulated memories just as people did. Not written memories. Lived memories. The afternoon wore on. The air inside the temple remained warm, though the thick stone walls continued to offer relief. One laborer paused to drink water from a small cup. The liquid felt refreshing. He drank slowly. Water deserved respect. Every drop had required effort. Someone had carried it, stored it, protected it from waste. The workers understood its value intimately. Without water, their tasks could not be performed. Without water, much of Egypt itself could not survive. The Nile made everything possible. Even here, far from the riverbank, its presence could be felt. The water spread across temple floors had begun its journey in the Nile. The bread waiting in homes depended upon Nile-fed fields. The entire civilization rested upon the steady generosity of the river. Inside a quiet passageway, a worker moved a damp cloth across stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The floor told its own story. Not through words. Not through carvings. Through wear. Through subtle marks left behind by countless people. Every visitor contributed something. A footprint. A grain of sand. A trace of dust. The workers removed these traces day after day. Yet new ones always arrived. The cycle never ended. There was something comforting about that. The endless return of ordinary tasks. The certainty that tomorrow would resemble today. The reliability of routine. Many ancient lives were built upon such rhythms. A farmer planted and harvested. A baker kneaded and baked. A fisherman cast nets and repaired them. A temple cleaner washed floors. Again and again. Year after year. The repetition was not considered strange. It was simply life. The afternoon sunlight grew warmer in color. Not dramatically. Only enough that attentive eyes might notice. The golden tones became richer. The stone walls reflected the change beautifully. Certain chambers seemed almost to glow. Dust floating through shafts of light appeared like tiny specks of gold suspended in the air. The scene felt peaceful. Almost dreamlike. One worker glanced upward briefly. Then returned to his labor. Such moments were common. Brief observations. Small pauses. Tiny reminders of the beauty hidden within ordinary days. The sounds inside the temple remained gentle. Footsteps. Water. Cloth moving across stone. Distant voices. Nothing harsh. Nothing sudden. The building seemed to encourage calmness. Even busy hours often felt measured and orderly. A newcomer might find the atmosphere remarkable. The workers simply considered it normal. As afternoon continued, some sections of the temple were already complete. The floors looked clean and orderly. The results of the day's labor could be seen everywhere. Not in dramatic transformations, but in countless small improvements. A cleaner corridor. A brighter courtyard. A well-maintained hall. Care reveals itself through details. The workers knew this. They took quiet satisfaction in work done properly. Not because anyone praised them. Not because recognition awaited. Simply because the task deserved attention. Many forms of labor throughout history have been like this. Important without being celebrated. Necessary without being noticed. The people who performed such work rarely appeared in records. Yet daily life depended upon them. As shadows lengthened a little further and the afternoon settled comfortably over the temple, the workers continued carrying water through ancient halls, washing stone by hand beneath the warm Egyptian light, while beyond the walls the Nile flowed steadily onward and another peaceful day moved gradually toward evening. The afternoon continued its slow journey toward evening. The sun drifted lower above the Nile Valley, and the bright light that had filled the day softened into warm shades of gold. Shadows stretched across fields and roads. Palm trees stood quietly beside the river. The air grew gentler with every passing moment. Inside the temple, the final tasks of the day came to an end. The last water jars were returned to their places. The last cloths were gathered and folded. The last careful inspections were made along corridors and courtyards. The stone floors, washed patiently by hand, rested in calm silence. The workers looked upon the results of their labor. Not with pride that demanded attention. Not with grand celebration. Only with the quiet satisfaction that comes from a task completed with care. Soon they stepped beyond the temple walls. Their sandals carried them home along familiar roads. The city was settling into evening. The smell of bread drifted through the air. Families gathered beneath simple roofs. Children listened to soft voices. Oil lamps glowed in small homes built from mud brick. Across the land, people prepared for rest. The workers who had spent the day washing temple floors became part of that peaceful evening world. Their labor was finished. Their water jars were empty. Their hands were tired. Their shoulders carried the memory of the day. Yet home waited. Food waited. Sleep waited. And above everything, the sky slowly darkened. The Nile flowed quietly through the gathering dusk. Its waters reflected the fading colors of sunset. Boats rested along the banks. Birds settled among reeds and palm branches. The river moved onward just as it always had. Just as it always would. Night arrived gently. The first stars appeared overhead. Then more. Then countless points of light spread across the heavens. The temple stood quietly beneath them. Its halls were calm. Its floors were clean. Its walls held the coolness of approaching night. The sounds of the day faded away. No more splashing water. No more footsteps crossing the stone. Only stillness. Only peace. The workers slept. The city slept. The river continued its endless journey through the darkness. And somewhere beneath the stars of ancient Egypt, beside the quiet waters of the Nile, the memory of careful hands, cool stone, and simple daily labor drifted softly into the night. The warm desert wind moved gently across the land. Palm leaves whispered. Water touched the shore. The stars watched silently above. And the ancient world settled into perfect calm. Sleep came easily there. Beside the river. Beneath the stars. In the quiet embrace of another peaceful Egyptian night.